Alright everybody, today I want to be going over the recent Warcraft developer interview that happened, and just going over some of the things that I thought were interesting about it and just kind of my thoughts on them. So the first thing is about the secondary traits that are going to be coming onto the relics. So for people who aren't aware, there's going to be one fixed trait on a relic, and then there's going to be one random trait that happens. So a secondary trait that you get. So that secondary trait will never be the same as the first one, and it will always be a throughput trait. So it will never be one of the random utility ones you get on your relics. So I think this is a good system because it does introduce some excitement to some of the relics. You might have one really good relic that might not even drop from the raid, and therefore all the relics in the raid might either be null for your class because they're just simply, your weapons might not scale with item level, like the monks, for example. But so I think this is an overall really good idea. A lot of people don't like RNG, but this does make at least every relic have a chance to be good for your class. You find it might not be priest specific, but for a lot of classes, just a lot of the relics in the raids aren't exciting. So I think this is a good change. The next thing I want to talk about was the legendaries. So in 7.2, the legendary system will be exactly how I wanted it to be implemented in my last legendary video. So that was that the catch-up mechanic will be spec specific. So if you don't have any legendaries for Frost, for example, as a mage, and you've got all your legendaries for Fire, your bad luck protection as Frost will count as you having no legendaries. Again, this is I think it's a much better system than having just the legendary working like the tier, and this is just because if legendary works like tier, where they just work across all the specs, none of those legendaries are then exciting. It doesn't matter what legendary you get. Well, it does matter, but you're not excited about any of the legendaries. So again, I think this is a good change coming in 7.2. So getting legendaries for your off-spec will be relatively easy, at least the first two, because the first two have a really high chance of getting them. In 7.2, there will also be crafted legendaries with a utility effect on them. So who knows what they could be, but they're also going to have a large stat budget, something like Pride as, for example, where it has large amounts of secondary stats and large amounts of sockets, and this is to further enforce the utility aspect of them and make them more a craftable, orientated thing. So I do like the system. Again, it gives, especially for classes like healers, where throughput generally might not be your primary concern. Having some kind of utility might be really helpful for you. So this crafted legendary system, you might find will be, even though they didn't want them to be your best in slot, I think they might be very interesting. But again, it just depends on the power of this utility. You find things like the Pillars of the Dark Portal, say for the Warlock. That legendary can actually be really handy on a lot of fights. Having an instant teleport thing that you can give to your whole raid just on an instant cast, can be very good. So yeah. Now the Mythic Plus changes. So there's going to be overall less AP from Mythic Pluses, but you will be getting higher AP for the higher dungeon you complete. And there will also be a much higher reward from the end of the week, determined by what level you complete. So if you want to, if they said the ballpark number in current levels is if you complete a plus 15 for the week, you'll be getting 2 million artifact power for completing that. So that is a fairly significant amount of artifact power. Obviously that keeps scaling up as well, as they said, so up to plus 20, plus I think they even said plus 30, so hopefully the system keeps scaling with the amount of artifact power you gain. There was nothing said about how well you complete the dungeon, based on what artifact you get, and they've also said coming in 7.2 that longer dungeons will reward more artifact power. Now I did make a video on this, but I didn't actually get around to uploading it because this information came out, 2 days ago. So I haven't got around to uploading it. But again, it just depends on the power of this utility. So just as I was making the video. Like I made the video, I was uploading, and the information came out in 7.2. So I didn't actually upload it, but this is exactly what I was asking for. You know, higher AP from longer dungeons, and you know, more rewards. You know, the rewards to keep scaling, and that's exactly what's happening. So that's really good to see. Now there was something that was touched on artifact power. You know, as we have the linear gain in the Paragon right now, it kind of takes away from what artifact knowledge was doing. The catch-up mechanic, you know, for people over time, because artifact knowledge is capped, and the Paragons aren't exponential because of that. So Paragons do take a lot to grind, and it is a lot harder to get up your off-spec weapons relative to your main weapon. This will be changing in 7.2, so you will see exponential gains on, exponential requirements on the amount of artifact power you need to level up. So this will hopefully create sort of the same situation we had in Emerald Nightmare, where, you know, the raid was soft capped by your artifact power. And I think this is a really good system, because over time, as you gain power through this, you know, kind of pseudo catch-up mechanic through your artifact weapon, you know, you're gaining power constantly. The raids get slightly nerfed as time goes on, and makes it easier for more casual guilds to clear the content, rather than just at a set time a flat nerf goes through the dungeon. That kind of feels very false if you're actually, you know, doing the raid at that point. So I think this is a much better way of doing it, is making AP, your artifact level, soft nerf raids over time. Now obviously this does suck for the top end of progression. You know, if you're these people who are putting in, you know, 80 hours a week to farm content, having this kind of endless system of grinding artifact power does, you know, is a very annoying system, because you literally have to sit farming artifact power, you know, for weeks before the raid comes out to be competitive. But the thing is that the game, you know, there is a very small portion of that player base who are doing it, and they do it to themselves. So, you know, if there can be artificial caps introduced into the raids, which, you know, might be a good suggestion, but then that does take away from the people who do like to grind out and continually progress their character. So while, you know, that might be a nice system for some people where there is a cap, you know, it kind of does then put limits on the game, which, you know, for people who might have the time to play that game, the game that much, and want to play the game that much, then that kind of just feels just as shitty for them. And it is, so there is two sides to every argument, and I am leaning with the side where it's better for the, you know, the casual player, where it's these caps aren't introduced, and they are soft nerfed over time with things like artifact knowledge, where over time things will just become easier to get, and these caps aren't introduced, so the people who do want to, who may get a week off work or something, can progress their character further ahead, but it's not going to be so far where no one else can ever catch up. So this does come with a combination of multiple things. So artifact knowledge, that's going to be continually to scale. We have the exponential gains on artifact power, and then obviously a lot more, a never-ending goal as well will make, I think the game a lot better, and it'll also make off specs a lot more viable, because you can catch up your off specs to a near level of your main spec. As we saw, this was touched on again, as we saw during Emerald Nightmare, you could level up your off specs, because the amount of artifact power to get one level in your main spec might have been the same as getting 20 in your off spec, for example. So your off spec wasn't that far behind in artifact power, whereas now, because we have the linear gaining Paragon, your off spec is never going to be as high unless you've farmed out thousands of dungeons at the moment to get all the artifact power for every single spec. Now, another interesting thing they did say on the Q&A was about tier pieces. Now, because we now have 6 pieces of tier, 2 and 4 piece will be a thing. They will not be mutually exclusive. That was explicitly stated. So that means you can wear your 2 piece from the previous tier, so from Nighthold, and you will be able to wear the 4 piece from Tomb of Sargeras. Now, their reasoning for saying this, for keeping it like this, was that legendaries do take up those pieces, and it will make a more interesting way to to spec out your character. Now, this will be good for some classes, bad for others. Now, the classes it'll be good for will be classes that have legendaries on pieces. If they're say legendary legendary wrists are the best, for example. So for fire mages, for example, so they might have gloves, wrists and the ring. They don't count as tier pieces, so you can easily be wearing the 2 piece from Nighthold and the 4 piece from Tomb of Sargeras, and they might be at an advantage to everybody else. Whereas a class that has the best in slot, say on a chest, their best in slot legendary might be on a chest, then you have a really tough choice to make, whether you want to be wearing that legendary chest or whether you want to be wearing a 2 piece. Now, provided that the tier pieces and the legendaries are sufficiently the same in power level, I think this could actually create a really interesting dynamic for how you gear your character. Whether you want to take that slight item level drop and might be changing up legendaries, and then wearing, say, the 4 piece and a legendary without wearing the 2 piece, whereas somebody else could be wearing the 4 piece and the 2 piece from the previous set and then a different legendary. This kind of creates a really interesting dynamic on what gear you can be wearing and what gear is people's best in slot lists. I think it's a really boring, for anyone who's finished a tier and gotten best in slot before. I think it's really boring that there is a certain best in slot set for some characters, certain best in slot gear, and that you're always waiting for 1 week to get a certain thing from a certain boss and whatnot. I just think this system creates a lot of choices. I find right now, I think it's really kind of at the moment, I think it's really interesting between my specs, what kind of different gear combinations I can wear, because there's legendaries are quite powerful, and there's things like the Drape of Shame for healers, which is very powerful depending on the amount of crit. So I can really mix and match up the gear I have, and create a whole lot of different stats on across different characters. There is a whole lot of different gear available because of Mythic Plus. So there's really a lot of customization I can do, and there's a lot of things I can try out, which keeps things fresh. So I think while this system some classes may completely despise because they have to wear 2 piece and 4 piece and they can't they don't drop a legendary, I think overall that as long as the tier pieces from some specs are kind of equivalent in power level to some of the legendaries, I think if everything kind of gives like a net 5% gain or whatever, so a 2 piece is a net 5% gain, whereas and a legendary is a net 5% gain, that it'll just open up a lot of choices, and it'll open up a whole lot more reasons to go do, say, a Mythic Plus dungeon, or a whole lot of reasons to go back and go do Nighthold to get a Mythic piece of gear, or just to give you a whole lot of things to constantly be doing in the game, to be changing how your character is played, rather than just having a stock standard, this is the best gear available, this is what you need to have to do the best. So I think that can kind of create an interesting system, and I hope it stays, because I think I go against the grain a bit. I think a lot of people will kind of be against that, but I think as time progresses, and as we've seen with the legendaries and the gear right now, is that best in slot lists are kind of dying because of how different people have different legendaries. One thing that wasn't in the Q&A but that I would like to touch on is with the Warforged and Titan Forging. Actually, I'll leave that for a different time. I'll make another video about that. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something, and I look forward to your comments. Alright, bye.